Have you ever opened your front door only to find a wedding invitation taped there for a ceremony happening in your own backyard, even though you never gave anyone permission? That happened to me. My name is Jackson Cole. All I wanted was to renovate my grandparents' old house, a quiet, sacred place. But suddenly, I became the only one standing up against a greedy HOA and a delusional bride who thought my land was the stage for her fairy tale. This wasn't just trespassing. This was a power play, full of forged documents, inflated egos, and one man who refused to back down. A man ready to go to war to protect the place he calls home. So sit back and listen closely. This is the story of a wedding torn down, an HOA brought to its knees, and a warning to anyone who dares to cross a boundary without asking first. My name is Jackson Cole. I'm 39, a former construction engineer from Seattle, now living in my grandparents' old house in the town of Maple, Glen, a quiet place where I thought I could start over. I didn't return to work. I came back to restore something real, something rooted, and for my grandfather, who passed away last year and left me the century-old wooden estate. That house is my family's lifeblood. Nearly 5 acres of land, lined with old oak trees, a weathered grape trellis where Grandpa used to make homemade wine, and a backyard where I played soccer with my cousins every summer. But on a quiet Monday morning, just as I was about to start my day with a hot cup of coffee, something strange caught my eye. It was taped to the front door, a thick wedding invitation, pale cream with embossed gold lettering. It looked like something out of a royal wedding. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a neighbor stuck it there by mistake. But then I read it more closely, and my heart pounded harder. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Melissa Caldwell and Jonathan Briggs, to be held at the residence, 4054 Whispering Oaks, Maple Glen. I blurted out, "What the hell?" "That's my house." At first, I thought it was a prank, but the invitation was far too real. Not just because of the paper quality, but also because of the attached event breakdown. Catering for 80 guests, an outdoor DJ, and even a horse-drawn carriage for the bride. I stood frozen on the porch. I looked at the door, then stepped back inside and double-checked my address online. No mistake. It was my house. I took a sip of coffee, now cold, and dialed the number printed at the bottom of the invitation. 3 rings and a syrupy sweet. Voice answered, "Hello, Caldwell Briggs Wedding Planning. This is Melissa." I tried to stay calm. "Yes, I'm calling about the venue, 4554 Whispering Oaks. That's my private residence. I believe you've made a serious mistake." She let out a little chuckle. "Oh, don't worry. Everything's been approved by the HOA. You just need to make sure the driveway stays clear. We've hired our own valet service." I frowned. "No, you misunderstand. My name is Jackson Cole. I live at that address. I am the homeowner. I have never authorized any wedding to be held here." Silence. 1 beat, 2. Then her voice turned colder. "Well, I believe the HOA said it was fine. You can't just cancel this event. Everything is scheduled. We've paid in full and sent out the invitations. Backing out now is not an option." I gripped the phone tighter. "Excuse me? Who do you think I am? The groundskeeper?" She didn't answer. The call ended. I sat at the kitchen table, still holding my coffee, hands trembling, not from fear, but from rage. What kind of person schedules a wedding on my land and claims the HOA gave them the green light like they own the place? I opened my land records on the computer. My name was clearly listed on the deed. My home was not within any HOA boundaries. I confirmed that when I inherited it. But this wasn't just about ownership. This was a blatant violation of the most sacred place in my life. People can break fences or cross boundary lines, but to plan a wedding in my backyard without asking? That's an insult. That evening, I walked out back. The grass was still wet and overgrown from last week's storm, but in my mind, I could already see it. Rows of white chairs, a floral arch, strangers milling around, music blaring. Not the laughter of my family, but of outsiders. I muttered to myself, "Not gonna happen. This is my land, my home, and I swear no one steps through that gate without knowing exactly who I am. They picked the wrong man to mess with, and their wedding is officially canceled, permanently. After that infuriating phone call, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, cycling through disbelief, outrage, and a quiet but rising resolve. I walked the property with a flashlight in hand that night, pacing like a soldier on patrol. The moonlight hit the old trellis behind the garden, where my grandmother's rose vines used to bloom like fire in the summer. The flowers were gone now, but the structure still stood, proud and stubborn. Just like her. Just like me. This wasn't just a house. It was a living memory. A place where my grandparents built a life brick by brick, season by season. My grandpa raised chickens out back and brewed cider in the shed. My grandma, Ruth Cole, was a horticulturist who turned this land into a personal Eden. Native oaks, wildflowers, climbing roses, and the sweetest strawberries this side of the Mississippi. And now some entitled stranger named Melissa Caldwell wanted to use it like a public park? No way. I went into the attic the next morning, where my grandpa used to keep all the documents, old tax records, maps, deeds. It was still dusty and smelled like pine wood and old books. I flipped open a metal file box marked Land and Property. Cole? There it was. A century-old deed, original plat maps, and most importantly, no HOA jurisdiction anywhere on the property. You see, when the HOA was formed for this neighborhood back in the early 90s, my grandparents refused to sign over any portion of their land. They didn't need sidewalk committees and trash bin inspections dictating how they lived. They were old school, independent, and proud. And because of that, this land remained a legal island. HOA could pretend to reach, but they had no legal rope. So how the hell did Melissa think she could throw a wedding here? That question kept burning in my head as I drove into town to meet with Old Man Bartlett, the local attorney who'd handled my grandparents' affairs for decades. His office smelled like leather and pipe smoke, and when I showed him the wedding invitation, he narrowed his eyes like a hawk spotting a rat in the tall grass. "Let me guess," he said. "HOA told her she could use the property, but they don't own a single inch of it." "Exactly," I replied. "They're out of bounds, but she's already sending out invitations and renting tents like she owns the place." He leaned back, rubbed his temples. "Jackson, I don't want to alarm you, but something fishy's going on here. No one mistakenly lists someone else's private residence as their wedding venue unless they've been told by someone they have that right." He was right. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an inside job. I asked Bartlett to dig into any HOA filings, permits, or unusual activity in the neighborhood over the past month. Meanwhile, I drove back home and started walking the property line, camera in hand, recording everything. That's when I found something that chilled me. Tucked behind the grove near the south fence line, there was a small stake in the ground with an orange ribbon tied around it. Next to it, a handwritten sign on cardboard. Tent Area A, 60x40. They had already marked the land. That wasn't just presumptuous. That was an invasion. I ripped the stake out of the ground, took photos, and then I went online to search for the name Melissa Caldwell. Turns out she wasn't just some clueless bride. She was the niece of the current HOA president, Sharon Caldwell, a woman who had a reputation in town for pushing HOA boundaries into places they didn't belong, so that was it. They thought I'd be a pushover, a lone guy returning from the city, still fixing up an old house, no wife, no kids, someone easy to bulldoze, someone who wouldn't fight back. They were dead wrong. I spent the next 48 hours putting together a package. Property documents, video proof of the stake, and an official cease and desist letter Bartlett drafted. But it wasn't just legal prep. I started cleaning up the place too. Not for a wedding, but for war. I mowed the lawn, cleared the brush, and brought out every single no trespassing sign I could find. I didn't want any excuse, no wiggle room for someone to claim I thought this was public. I posted signs every 30 feet along the property line, and on the gate, I mounted a laminated copy of the deed itself. "You want a wedding, Melissa? Go rent a ballroom. This house, this land, isn't just mine by law. It's mine by blood. And I'll be damned if I let some ribbon-waving Karen and her overreaching HOA cronies use it as their personal party venue. They picked the wrong patch of dirt, and the wrong man guarding it. Next up, confrontation. Because if they think this is over, they haven't met the real Jackson Cole yet. The morning after I posted my cease and desist letter and staked up signs around the property, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. But like clockwork, that control was tested before I could finish my second cup of coffee. The phone rang. Caller ID, private number. I let it buzz twice before picking up, bracing myself. This is Jackson. A woman's voice came through, haughty, slow, and polished like a politician's handshake. Mr. Cole, this is Sharon Caldwell, president of the Whispering Oaks Homeowners Association. I believe we need to discuss a certain misunderstanding regarding your property. There it was, the real puppet master behind this wedding fiasco. Melissa might have been the face-on, the invitation, but Sharon was the hand pulling strings. There's no misunderstanding, Mrs. Caldwell, I replied, tone flat. Your niece scheduled a wedding at my house without permission. That's trespassing, plain and simple. Sharon chuckled lightly like I'd told a charming joke at a garden party. Well now, Mr. Cole, let's not throw around such ugly words. This is a community and we pride ourselves on unity and flexibility. Your home, while technically outside the formal HOA jurisdiction, is still within our community planning zone. I nearly dropped my mug. Planning zone? She continued, unfazed. When the HOA was founded, your grandparents declined to join, that's true. But in the spirit of neighborhood cohesion, certain public use permissions were incorporated into our bylaws, especially for properties adjacent to community lots. You, Mr. Cole, have a legacy parcel, a property with heritage value, which gives us a certain leeway. My knuckles went white. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You're telling me that because my grandparents didn't join your HOA and because the house is old, you believe you're allowed to rent out my land like a community center? Sharon's voice tightened. We didn't rent anything. Melissa simply submitted a community event request, which was approved by the board. As president, I greenlit it. There it was. A confession, dressed in bureaucratic lace. You greenlit an event on land your organization doesn't own, doesn't manage, and has no legal authority over. She paused. I'm offering you a chance to be a team player, Mr. Cole. Backing out now would create embarrassment, not just for my niece, but for our entire neighborhood. Think about the message that it sends. Oh, I was thinking about messages, all right. Here's the message I'm sending. If one more piece of furniture, stake, or string of fairy lights shows up on my land, I'll call the sheriff, the news, and every real estate attorney in this county. You wouldn't dare. I cut her off. Try me. And then I hung up. Not a second later, my phone lit up with an email. Subject line, Community Action Advisory. Whispering Oaks HOA. They'd sent a notice to the entire neighborhood. The message framed me as an uncooperative resident resisting a communal celebration. They called the wedding a symbolic event honoring local history, and accused me, without naming me directly, of selfishly blocking community access to a culturally significant property. They even embedded a link to a GoFundMe for last-minute wedding relocation costs. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a wedding. This was a power move. Sharon Caldwell wanted to make an example out of me, to show the whole neighborhood that no one, not even a landowner outside her domain, could stand up to the HOA without consequence. Well, they'd picked the wrong damn man to pressure. That afternoon, I printed every email, every map, every stake photo. I called Bartlett and handed him the pile, along with a signed affidavit and video footage of the wedding stakes. He didn't say much, but when he stood up, I saw something behind his eyes I hadn't seen before. Resolve. Then I went to the county office, walked straight to the zoning desk and requested official boundary documents and an HOA authority map. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I said the address. Oh yeah, she said. You're the guy with the farmhouse. We've been getting calls from your HOA all week. I smiled. They're not my HOA. With documents in hand, I returned. home and spent the rest of the day mounting cameras along the fence line. Not for paranoia, for proof. I wanted footage. I wanted faces. I wanted every bouquet and folding chair that crossed that line to be recorded and stamped with time, GPS, and clarity. Because if Sharon and Melissa thought they were going to bulldoze through me with a smile and a spreadsheet, they had another thing coming. This wasn't about community. It was about control. And starting now, they'd see exactly how it feels to pick a fight with someone who doesn't just own the land, but who knows every nail, beam, and inch of it better than they ever could. The wedding was still scheduled for 2 weeks out, and I had just declared war. If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago whether I thought a wedding could turn into a war, I would have laughed and said you were watching too much daytime TV. But after that HOA email blast, the lines were drawn, and I wasn't just up against one overzealous bride anymore. I was going toe-to-toe with an entire HOA machine that had built itself on intimidation, phony authority, and neighborly guilt-tripping. And I was about to crack that facade wide open. The next day, I met with Bartlett again. He looked more fired, up than I'd ever seen him. He handed me a copy of a document someone from the HOA had filed at the county a week earlier. My stomach dropped. It was labeled Special Community Venue Exception Permit, granting permission to use 4054 Whispering Oaks as a temporary event space for the Caldwell-Briggs wedding. Signed not by me, the legal owner, but by a woman named Catherine Cole. That name hit me like a slap. Catherine Cole was my mother. She died 10 years ago. There was no way in hell she signed anything. "This is forged," I said, my voice shaking with rage. Bartlett nodded. "We're already preparing an official fraud complaint. But here's the kicker. They didn't even try that hard. Look at the signature." I leaned in. It was sloppy. The name wasn't even in her handwriting. Hell, it wasn't even spelled right. Catherine, not Catherine. A lazy fake. Someone in that HOA office must have Googled my family tree, saw an old record with her name on it, and thought they could get away with this. Thought the courts wouldn't dig. Thought I'd back down before I even noticed. Wrong on all counts. I marched straight to the zoning board and slammed the document down on their desk. "This signature is forged," I said. "My mother's dead. I own the property, and I never gave permission." The clerk's face turned pale. They promised to launch an internal inquiry. I didn't wait. I sent copies of the forged permit to the sheriff's office and filed a report. That alone bought me some breathing room, but Sharon Caldwell wasn't done. That evening, a couple of men in polo shirts and clipboards showed up at my gate. No HOA badges, no business cards, just those smug expressions like they owned the place. "Afternoon, sir. We're here to assess the backyard layout for the event tent and portable restroom placement." I stared at them for a long second. "Event tent?" I said. "Restrooms?" They nodded like this was normal. I took a step closer. "This is private property. You're trespassing. You've got 10 seconds to walk yourselves back to that truck before I call the sheriff and add your names to a felony fraud complaint." That got their attention. They exchanged looks, stammered some nonsense about HOA approval, and then beat a retreat down the gravel driveway like they'd just seen a ghost. But I didn't stop there. I took those video clips, me confronting the clipboard boys, the HOA email blast, the forged document, and I compiled them into a neat little file. Then I made copies. One for the zoning office, one for the sheriff, one for the local news station, and one, just for fun, that I hand-delivered. To Sharon Caldwell's mailbox. "You want to play games? Fine." But I play to win. Later that night, I walked the perimeter one more time, flashlight in hand. I stopped at the oak tree where Grandpa carved our family initials decades ago. My hand brushed over the letters. JC and RC, Jackson and Ruth Cole. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about dignity, about protecting the people who built something real and lasting against people who only know how to fake and take. The HOA wanted a showpiece event. They were about to get one, but it wouldn't end with flower petals and champagne. It would end with permits torn in half, tents dragged away, and one very public reckoning. They thought they had a permit. They thought they had control. But what? they really had was a ticking clock, and I was winding it tighter every day. By the time the forged permit made its rounds through the sheriff's department and the zoning board, word had gotten out. I could feel the shift in the air around Maple Glen. Neighbors gave me knowing nods at the hardware store, and one elderly man at the diner clapped a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "About time someone stood up to those HOA vultures." But I wasn't done. No, not by a long shot. You see, when someone tries to steal your land, your history, and your name, you don't just defend it. You take back every inch they touched and leave a message so loud they'll hear it in the next. Zip code. That's when I made the call. To a man named Dean Trumbull. Dean and I went way back. He ran a private construction and salvage company out of the next county. The kind of guy who didn't ask too many questions but understood the phrase, clean sweep, no traces. When I told him what I wanted, he laughed. "Jackson, are you telling me you want to demo your own backyard?" "Not the backyard," I said. "The setup, the stage, the poles, the false fantasy they've started to build here. I want it gone, ripped up by the roots." He whistled low. "You got it." I gave him a date, 2 days before the wedding. We didn't have much time, but we didn't need it. Dean ran a tight ship. And me? I had spent the last week taking notes, photos, measurements, documenting every illegal inch the HOA had dared to touch. While Dean prepared, I made my next move. A preemptive legal strike. I sent Sharon Caldwell and the entire HOA board a certified letter through Bartlett's office. It stated, very clearly, that any further activity on my property would be considered trespassing, and that I had legal authority to remove all unpermitted structures without warning. I attached pictures of the stakes, fake event zones, and my personal favorite, a screenshot of Melissa's Instagram story that showed her toasting champagne on my back deck. Caption, "Sneak peek at the wedding venue." They'd made a mistake. They left a trail. And now I was going to bulldoze it. By the time Friday came around, the HOA had started putting up real wedding gear, rented pavilions, fairy lights, even folding chairs had been stacked near the garden. And I just let them. I watched. I documented. And then, at sunrise on Sunday, Dean and his crew rolled in. 4 men, 2 flatbed trucks, 1 mission. They wore reflective vests, carried clipboards, and moved with military precision. Anyone watching from afar would have thought it was a scheduled teardown from a professional landscaping firm. It was. The only difference was, this crew wasn't here to plant roses. They were here to send a message. The tent stakes went first, pulled clean, from the ground. Then the string lights yanked from the trees like cobwebs. The dance floor platform? Disassembled, loaded onto the truck, and carted off within the hour. And the best part? Melissa Caldwell showed up halfway through. She stormed through the gate in a pastel jogging suit, latte in hand, mouth wide open. "What is happening? You can't do this!" Dean didn't even blink. He handed her a copy of the cease and desist letter. "We're under orders from the property owner, ma'am. Everything here is going. You can pick it up from our lot after 5 p.m. She turned to me like I was supposed to explain myself. "You can't ruin my wedding!" she screamed. "Do you know how much we paid?" I folded my arms. "No, but I know how much you didn't ask before trespassing." Her face went red. Sharon Caldwell came storming in minutes later, clipboard clutched like it was a Bible. "This is outrageous. This is vandalism. We will sue!" Didn't flinch. "Go ahead," I said. "But make sure you spell my name right on the court documents, because I'll be countersuing for fraud, trespassing, and emotional distress. And I've already got the sheriff's department and channel 9 on standby." I pointed to the security camera above my deck. Smile. "You're on record." Dean's crew finished within the next hour. By noon, not a single chair, flower, or light strand remained. All that was left? A clean lawn, a silent house, and 2 furious women standing in the middle of a dream that had just been shattered by reality and the law. I closed the gate behind them myself. "No more weddings," I said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." Then I turned around and walked back inside, the sun warm on my shoulders, the air finally clear again. You see, some people think a house is just wood and nails, but when it holds your family's blood and name, it becomes something else. And if anyone tries to steal that, you tear down the lie before it ever becomes a fairy tale. By Monday morning, the HOA's kingdom was showing cracks. Word travels fast in a small town. Word about a wedding being ripped apart by a demolition crew? That travels like wildfire soaked in gasoline, especially when it involves Sharon Caldwell, the self-proclaimed queen of Whispering Oaks, getting kicked off private property with a shaky video going semi-viral on local Facebook groups. I didn't post it, but someone did. And that short clip, just 30 seconds of Sharon yelling, "This is illegal," while Dean's guys calmly disassembled a tent behind her, had already racked up over 4,000 views by lunch. I wasn't looking for validation, but I got it. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years started dropping by. Some came to say, "Glad someone finally stood up to her." Others brought cookies or offered to mow the lawn. One guy, Tom Ridley, who lived 2 streets over, handed me a folded piece of paper on my front porch. "I thought you might want this," he said. It was a copy of an email thread between HOA board members about the wedding, about me, about how to deal with the outsider. Tom had been CC'd by accident. The emails made my blood run cold and hot all at once. They talked about how I was a stubborn barrier to their community expansion goals, how Sharon had taken initiative to use my land as a symbolic gesture of inclusion. They spoke in code, but the meaning was clear. They were trying to set a precedent. If they could hold an event here once, just once, without real blowback, they'd use it as ammunition, a slippery slope toward annexation. Power disguised as a party, but the party had ended, and now the masks were coming off. That night, I called a town hall meeting. Not official, not formal, just a backyard gathering of anyone who was sick of HOA overreach. I expected 5, maybe 10 people. 32 showed up. Chairs, standing room, even a couple teenagers leaning against the fence with arms crossed, listening. I stood in front of the garden, near the spot where Melissa's altar had once been, and I told them everything. The forged permit, the fake signatures, the threats, the trespassing. I showed the documents, the screenshots, the footage. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. The truth did all the heavy lifting. By the time I was done, you could hear a pin drop in the grass. Then came the questions, the stories, the other victims. Turns out, I wasn't the first Sharon had tried to steamroll. Just the first who fought back publicly. One man's shed had been painted over while he was out of town. Another had a fruit tree cut down because it obstructed uniform landscaping. One older woman choked up as she told how she was fined $300 because her porch light bulb was the wrong shade of white. People were angry, not just at Sharon, but at themselves, for staying silent. "This ends now," I told them. "We either let them chip away at our rights until there's nothing left, or we draw a line. Right here, right now," someone clapped. Then another. Then everyone. We didn't need torches and pitchforks. We had truth, and a paper trail. By the end of the night, we had signatures, a petition to call a special board election, a motion to remove Sharon Caldwell as HOA president pending investigation into abuse of power and forgery. I didn't lead that charge. The neighborhood did. All I'd done was dig in my heels and say, no. Loud enough for others to realize they could say it too. The next morning, HOA signs around the neighborhood started disappearing. People stopped answering Sharon's calls. Her allies went quiet, and by the end of the week, Whispering Oaks felt a little lighter, a little freer. Funny how that works. All it took was one wedding that never happened to show a whole neighborhood. They'd been saying yes for far too long, and me? I was just getting started. You could almost feel it, the silence that settles before a storm. Only this time, the storm wasn't mine. It was Sharon Caldwell's, and it was rolling in fast. The petition to remove her as HOA president gathered over 100 signatures in 48 hours, more than double what was needed to trigger a special vote under HOA bylaws. And trust me, We made sure every single name was verified, legal, and time-stamped. Sharon, of course, didn't take it well. She tried to fight it the only way she knew how. Threats, emails full of legal jargon, and letters stuffed into people's mailboxes dripping with sincere regret and thinly veiled ultimatums. But the neighborhood had finally woken up, and no amount of phony kindness or passive-aggressive fear tactics could put them back to sleep. The board vote was scheduled for the following Tuesday night, but before that could happen, something else dropped, and it hit like a sledgehammer. County Fraud Investigation Report. It arrived via email, courtesy of my lawyer Bartlett, and then it went public, leaked to local media faster than Sharon could hit unsend. The forged community venue exception permit, with my late mother's name spelled wrong and signed in a handwriting that looked like it belonged to a drunk teenager? Yeah, that was now Exhibit A. The report concluded that not only was the permit invalid, it was likely submitted with intent to deceive. Sharon Caldwell was listed as the approving party, and Melissa Caldwell, her niece, was cited as the event coordinator who stood to benefit directly from unauthorized property usage. The county recommended a criminal investigation. Boom. Within hours, Channel 9 rolled a van into the neighborhood. A local reporter knocked on my door for a comment. I declined, but I gave them copies of the documents. Let the evidence do the talking. The reporter camped on Sharon's lawn the rest of the day, but she never came out. The next evening at the HOA meeting, hosted in the local library after the community center mysteriously closed for maintenance, Sharon finally showed her face. Her signature pastel pantsuit was gone, replaced by dark slacks and a blazer 2 sizes too tight. Her smile, strained, hollow, desperate. She stood behind the podium like a cornered animal pretending it wasn't already caught. I understand. There have been concerns, she began, her voice shaky but still trying to sound in control. But I want to remind everyone that my actions were always guided by what I believed to be in the best interest of the community. Someone near the back of the room scoffed loudly. A few chuckles followed. Sharon's eyes twitched, but she pressed on. She tried to pivot, claimed the wedding was a mistake in communication, that the forged document was a clerical error, and that her niece Melissa had acted independently without her knowledge. Lies. All of it. Then came the vote. One by one, people raised their hands. Not a murmur. No hesitation. Even board members who once nodded politely in Sharon's presence now stared straight ahead and voted yes to remove her. The final tally? 34-2. Her reign was over. There was no applause, no shouting, just a quiet, collective exhale, like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and finally let it out. Sharon stood frozen. For a second, I thought she might scream or storm out, but instead she did something that surprised everyone. She laughed. Not the charming, phony laugh she used at HOA barbecues. A broken, bitter chuckle. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "You all think this changes anything?" And she walked out the door without another word. No farewell, no apology. Just the sound of high heels clicking against tile and the rustle of a folder under her arm. The next day, Melissa Caldwell's wedding was officially canceled, again. Only this time, the rental company pulled out, the caterers refunded the deposit, and the county fined her $5,000 for violating zoning regulations, but none of that mattered as much as what stayed behind. The neighborhood changed, the silence that once blanketed. Whispering Oaks wasn't one of control anymore, it was one of peace. Yards grew a little wilder, flags came back out. Kids played in driveways without worry of being written up for sidewalk chalk. People smiled more. They waved. And me? I got my backyard back. My family's name was cleared, and a town that had once looked at me like an outsider now treated me like a damn neighbor. Funny what happens when you stand your ground. Funny how fast a crown falls, when it was made of paper the whole time. 1 week after that decisive vote, no one in Whispering Oaks uttered the name Sharon Caldwell anymore. Not because they forgot, because they chose not to remember. She vanished from meetings, message boards, and even from the wary glances of her neighbors. No more warning letters shoved into doors, no more phone calls checking if the grass was cut to regulation. Silence. Finally, in the way this neighborhood had always dreamed of. And me? I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, staring out at the backyard that nearly became the wedding stage of a stranger. The morning breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the rich smell of soil, the smell of real life, untouched, unmapped by any board of directors. My grandmother used to say, "The land doesn't lie, but people do." And she was right. They tried to rewrite ownership, tried to turn this place into a community venue, whitewashed behind words like togetherness, unity, and common good. But the truth doesn't need pretty words. It just needs to be protected. Neighbors began showing up more often, not to ask if I needed help, but just to talk. Some brought cookies, others handed me seeds for the garden. One elderly woman gave me a black and white photo of my grandfather standing by the old oak, telling me she'd kept it since she was a child. "Your granddad was the last person on this street to ever say no to the HOA," she said. "And now, it's you." Her words hit me in the chest. Not out of pride, but because I realized I hadn't done this just for myself. I had protected a memory. I had preserved a piece of my family's soul. And by accident, I'd given the neighborhood something they hadn't had in a long time. A voice, whispering. Oaks was no longer a polished replica of suburban perfection. American flags were back on doorposts. Kids chalked up sidewalks without fear of fines. Guitars played in the late afternoon. Someone even started keeping chickens in their backyard, something Sharon had once strictly banned for aesthetic cohesion. And me? I wasn't that outsider anymore. Now I was Jackson from the coal house, just like my grandparents once were. Every morning I walked through the flower beds my grandmother planted. I restored the rose trellis, one root at a time, using her old handwritten gardening notebooks. The first blooms began to open. Not perfectly spaced, not uniform, but vibrant and honest. Then one afternoon, as the golden light spilled across the porch, I received a handwritten note carefully penned. "Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for preserving this land. Not just with paperwork, but with courage. We used to be afraid. We're not anymore." No signature. But I didn't need one. I understood. There are battles we never ask for, but must fight anyway. And if I had to do it again, I would. Every time, because sometimes protecting land isn't about fences or deeds, it's about preserving legacy. A single piece of property, even just an old wooden house tucked inside suburbia, can become a landmark for an entire community. If someone is brave enough to stand and say, "No, not here, not on my watch." And now, whenever someone asks me about that wedding that never happened, I just smile and reply, "Oh, they wanted flowers. I showed them. They were messing with the roots." Some people think resistance means shouting, threatening, making a scene. But here in Whispering Oaks, all I needed was a piece of land with my name on it, and a back that never bends. Didn't break anything. I didn't throw a punch. I just stood my ground and didn't let them take 1 inch more. And the HOA? They crumbled under the weight of their own lies. So if one day someone comes to you and says, "For the good of the community, you have to let us use your land," look them straight in the eyes and say, "This land has my name on it. And if you want it, bring a lawyer. My name is Jackson Cole, and this time the HOA picked the wrong man to mess with."